Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Caps. I'm joined with my host, SL, and you can call me Mr. Caps. Today, we're looking at the political persecution against Donald Trump. In particular, we are going to hear from someone on the left about it and hopefully learn something new.
His name is Glenn Kirshner, and I believe he's an attorney, maybe, probably. All of his content is about all the Trump cases. And we will do our best to find supporting information on anything we share our opinions on.
All right, let's see what we got.
The one in which the jury convicted him of 34 felony crimes, the one in which he is pending sentencing. We have a really interesting 48-hour time period coming up. There is one last hurdle that Lady Justice has to jump in order for Donald Trump to be sentenced. Let's talk about that, because justice matters.
Okay, so he on the boat that Trump is guilty of what, though? Because the 34 counts, the jury didn't decide the case altogether on the same crime, just if they thought one was being made, was my understanding.
Yes, I understood that to be the case also. They didn't prove a specific crime, just that one was made when he made the payments, making it a felony, and because he made 34 payments, you get the 34 felony counts.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, as you all know, Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felony crimes for falsifying business records to cover up the true nature of hush money payments he paid to a porn star, all motivated by his desire to cheat in and steal the 2016 presidential election.
The falsifying business records, they said, was the payments were put under business expenses and it should have been a campaign expense. But the head of campaign finance at the Federal Election Commission, the Agrency, the federal government put in charge of campaigns, and how candidates used the donations, said it would absolutely not be a campaign expense, further arguing why you can't have local county DA filing charges like these, because they don't know the campaign finance law, and it's really up to the Fed, or DOJ, to bring about these types of charges.
Do you believe the Justice Department should have intervened to protect both the FEC's jurisdiction and its own?
Without question.
And did the Justice Department intervene?
They did not. They only intervened in the Federal Election Commission's investigations.
So in other words, the Biden Justice Department allowed the Manhattan DA's office to usurp both the Justice Department and the FEC's jurisdiction, correct?
Absolutely.
And tell us, why is that problematic?
Well, it's problematic because it sets up a system. Well, first and foremost, it allowed the judge to get the law wrong in this particular case and issue a jury charge that had to do with willful contributions as opposed to knowing and willful contributions, which is what the law requires to be proven. But in a larger picture, it sets up a standard where you can have 50 different states trying federal election crimes under various standards.
He said the crime was Trump trying to steal the election. Notice how he used the word steal. I don't think they proved that part, but he still got convicted. It's also not illegal to pay someone money to keep quiet.
Accused President Trump of violating the federal election act. Gentlelady yields back. Professor Smith, in your in your written testimony, you said that the lead prosecutor, Matthew Colangelo, in his opening statement in the court, accused President Trump of violating the Federal Election Campaign Act. But the FEC didn't bring charges, I think you've said a couple times. Is that true?
That's correct.
And the Department of Justice didn't bring charges.
That's correct.
And if President Trump's campaign had paid for it, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election. Is that right?
That's correct.
And did President Trump's campaign have the money to pay for it?
Yes, they had plenty of money.
They had like $7-8 million still on hand on election day, I think, right?
Yes.
And certainly President Trump had the money to pay for it.
He'd already spent over $60 million on it.
Yeah, he had. So they'd already done that. Was it a political contribution?
No, I do not believe so for reasons stated. I can elaborate on those now, but,
Not only do you not believe so, their star witness didn't believe so. Michael Cohen said he was working clear back in 2011 to deal with this Miss Daniels making the allegations and wouldn't make this public, and he was doing it for other reasons. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they have been concerned about Daniels for a long time and keeping her quiet.
So the obligation wasn't caused by President Trump's candidacy for president of the United States. Is that right?
No, it was not.
Okay, Mr. Fahey, in your written testimony, you said one of the most alarming aspects of the case is that the fraud, quote, fraud, did not involve anyone losing money or even being harmed in any way. To the extent that the ledger entries were inaccurate, they were entered into the books of a private company that understood what they were for. It is unheard of for a fraud case to be brought where no losses were suffered. So there weren't any losses in this case at all, were there?
Yeah, that's what makes this so remarkable. And just, I can't even imagine someone bringing a fraud case to the United States Attorney's Office where nobody lost money, there were no victims, and no one was worse off at the end of it. It just makes it laughable, even before you get to steps 2 through probably 20 that make this case really absurd to have been brought to begin with.
It wasn't a contribution. If it was a contribution, it would not have been reported until after the election, and no one suffered any losses, and yet they bring this charge against President Trump. I find that just amazing. If that's not political motivation, I don't know, because what other motivation could there be?
It's really almost inarguable at this point that the motivation for this case was political. It's really, I've never heard a serious argument that it should have been prosecuted otherwise. I know Mr. Wu might have one, but I just haven't heard that, because it seems political from the inception all the way to the end.
Yeah. Wasn't a contribution, wouldn't have been reported even if it was, if they paid that out of the campaign. No one suffered loss, yet there was some kind of conspiracy to impact an election. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is they didn't tell the defendant what the crime was he was being charged with. Isn't that right, Judge?
That's correct. Right from the indictment, Donald Trump was charged with falsifying business records. To elevate that crime to a felony, he had to be concealing or committing other crimes.
When did the defendant in this trial, in this case, learn what he was being charged with?
At the end of the trial.
At the end of the trial. That's not supposed to happen in America, is it, Judge?
No, that is illegal.
So not only did he not know what he's being charged with, at the end of the trial, when he learned what it was, the judge also told the jury, you don't have to be unanimous in finding what we just discovered the charge actually was.
It's an extraordinarily egregious error to tell a jury they don't have to be unanimous. And I might add, by the way, those charges, the 3 additional ones, were never specified. They're described generally, so we don't know what exactly the jury thought was the illegality that was committed by Donald Trump. We have a very inspecific verdict.
Campaign finance expert says it wasn't a contribution. And even if it was a contribution, if they treated it as a contribution, paid it out of the campaign, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election, so there's no conspiracy to influence the election. No one suffered any harm or fraud in the initial case, former prosecutor tells us, and the judge tells us that the defendant didn't know what he was charged with until the end of the trial, and the judge gave instructions to the jury, never mind the fact the judge should have recused himself, which you point out in your written testimony, Judge. The judge didn't tell the jury, or told the jury you don't have to be unanimous. But the real thing here is the opportunity cost. And you raised this in your testimony, Mr. Fahey. The opportunity cost. When Alvin Bragg did the day 1 memo, says we are not going to charge all these felonies, we're going to bring them down to misdemeanors and let the bad guys roam the streets of New York. How that squares with what happened here, that to me is the real issue. That's the issue that most Americans see, like, we're going to do this to the former president of the United States, meanwhile, take felony charges against really bad guys on the street and bring them down to misdemeanors. That's the opportunity cost here, I believe, in Manhattan. You get the last word, Mr. Fahey.
Yeah, exactly. When you're letting carjackers out on bail or illegal immigrants that assault police officers aren't getting prosecuted, but this is the way you're using your time, in addition to the fact you run on a soft on crime policy and then you do take the most creative, aggressive approach to this crime, it's hard to argue it's anything other than.
And you may also know that Donald Trump is scheduled to be sentenced on those 34 felony convictions on September 18th. But you may not know there is one last hurdle, one final potential impediment to Donald Trump being sentenced on September 18th, and it involves something that's going to happen on September 16th, just 2 days prior to his sentencing date. Now, Donald Trump has been desperately trying to get his conviction thrown out. He filed a motion with Judge Merchan, the presiding judge in the New York case, saying, Judge Merchan, the Supreme Court decided the presidential immunity case, and I, Donald Trump, through his lawyers, I maintain that you need to throw out my 34 felony convictions based on the Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling. Well, I think Donald Trump is dead wrong on that, but he filed a motion asking Judge Merchan to do just that. So Judge Merchan said, fine, brief it up, submit the briefs to me, and I will decide on September 16th whether I'm going to throw out your 34 felony convictions based on this new harebrained ruling where the Supreme Court literally ruled that the Constitution is unconstitutional and that presidents can commit all of the crimes they want against the American people with complete impunity and immunity, if they're official acts of the presidency. Yeah, we've got to unravel and undo and reverse that horrific ruling, and we will. It will take time, but it will go the way of other horrific Supreme Court rulings like Plessy versus Ferguson, Korematsu. But here's what Judge Merchan said in a letter that he sent to the prosecutors and to Donald Trump's defense attorneys back on August 5th. Judge Merchan wrote that Trump's attorneys filed a pre-motion letter on July 1st, 2024, seeking leave to file a motion to set aside the jury's verdict, in other words, throw out the 34 offenses of conviction based on the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus the United States. That's the presidential immunity ruling. Judge Merchan continued, saying, a decision on the motion will be handed down off calendar on September 16th, 2024. Friends, Judge Merchan goes on to say something that is more than just interesting. I would go so far as to say it feels like a little bit of an Easter egg Judge Merchan dropped in this letter, because he goes on to say, okay, I'll resolve your motion to dismiss based on presidential immunity on September 16th, but please note the court appearance scheduled for September 18th, 2024 at 10 a.m., that would be Donald Trump's sentencing date, remains unchanged.
It's obvious this guy is highly emotional when Trump is involved. You can literally hear in his voice contempt even when he guesses something Trump may or may not have even said, wanted, or did. Interesting. I'm not sure he's an attorney now.
Hard to not see this as political. It just goes to show you how strong our belief systems run. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for more.